Karen Willoughby's morning routine was sacred. Coffee at exactly 7:15 a.m., neighborhood surveillance by 7:30, and complaint drafting by 8 o'clock. But today, that routine shattered when she opened her mailbox to find a letter that made her choke on her perfectly temperature-controlled coffee. Dear resident, the letter read, "It has come to our attention that your property at 42 Oakwood Lane contains an unauthorized swimming pool. As per Whispering Pines HOA bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 7, all recreational installations must be approved by the board. You have 14 days to remove the pool or face a daily fine of $250. Karen's face flushed a violent shade of crimson as she stared at the laminated pool that had taken 3 contractors and $85,000 to install. Her perfectly manicured nails crumpled the letter's edge. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, startling her husband Charles, who was quietly reading his newspaper on the patio. "I am the HOA. I'm the Vice President of Community Standards." Charles lowered his paper cautiously. "Which association sent that?" "Whispering Pines," Karen snapped, stomping across the pristine lawn. "But dear," Charles said softly, "we live in Oak Ridge Estates." Karen froze. He was right. Their house sat precisely 3 properties away from Whispering Pines, the neighboring development with the inferior landscaping, and, in Karen's often expressed opinion, lacks community standards. "Someone's made a terrible mistake," Karen hissed, straightening her linen blouse. "And they're going to regret it." Within minutes, Karen was speed-walking down Magnolia Boulevard toward the Whispering Pines clubhouse, her sensible heels clicking aggressively against the sidewalk. She had built a reputation in Oak Ridge Estates as the neighborhood enforcer, the woman who measured grass height with a ruler and documented every holiday decoration that violated the aesthetic guidelines. Nobody, out-Karened Karen Willoughby. The Whispering Pines clubhouse stood smaller than Oak Ridge's. In fact, Karen had mentioned at no fewer than 7 community meetings. Inside, a young woman with a messy ponytail sat behind the reception desk, scrolling on her phone. "Excuse me," Karen said sharply. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge immediately." The receptionist glanced up, unimpressed. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need an appointment. I've received this ridiculous letter about my pool, which is frankly none of your business as I don't even live in your jurisdiction." Karen slapped the letter onto the desk. "Oh," the receptionist smiled, "you must be Mrs. Willoughby. Mr. Peterson is expecting you." Karen blinked, thrown off balance. "Expecting me?" "Yes, he said you'd be in today. Right through that door." The receptionist pointed to an office with Douglas Peterson, HOA president, on the nameplate. As Karen marched toward the door, an uneasy feeling crept up her spine. How could they have known she'd come storming in? And why would they send her a violation letter for a property they didn't oversee? She pushed open the door to find a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses and a smile that immediately made her blood pressure spike. "Ah, Karen Willoughby," he said pleasantly. "I've been looking forward to meeting the infamous HOA enforcer of Oak Ridge Estates. Please have a seat. We have much to discuss about boundaries, both property and personal." Douglas Peterson had the calm demeanor of someone who enjoyed watching others unravel. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, but Karen remained standing, clutching her purse like a shield. "This letter is completely inappropriate," she declared, slapping it on his desk. "I don't live in Whispering Pines. Your jurisdiction ends at Magnolia and Elm." Douglas nodded pleasantly. "Technically, yes. Just as Oak Ridge Estates' jurisdiction ends at Sycamore Drive." He slid a folder across his desk, which makes these quite interesting. Karen reluctantly opened the folder. Inside were dozens of letters, violation notices, warnings, and fines, all bearing her signature as Oak Ridge Estates Vice President of Community Standards, all addressed to Whispering Pines residents. These were legitimate violations," Karen stammered, though her voice had lost its edge. "Were they?" Douglas raised an eyebrow. "Because according to county records, you've been issuing citations to at least 8 properties that fall outside Oak Ridge Estates boundaries for 3 years. Karen's mind raced through her mental map of the neighborhood. She'd always considered those corner properties part of Oak Ridge. They looked like they belonged with their properly maintained lawns and acceptable exterior paint colors. "There must be some mistake," she said weakly. "No mistake. You've been terrorizing my residents with unauthorized fines. Some of them actually paid, thinking they were legitimate." Douglas leaned forward. "Mrs. Thurman on Sycamore cried when you threatened to put a lion on her house over her daughter's wheelchair ramp." A memory flashed through Karen's mind. The elderly woman pleading that the ramp was medically necessary. Karen had insisted it violated the aesthetic guidelines regardless. "I was just maintaining standards," Karen said stiffly. "You were overstepping," Douglas countered. "And now we're going to discuss how you make this right." For the first time in years, Karen sat down without being in control of the situation. Her perfectly straightened shoulders slumped slightly. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously. Restitution, Douglas said simply. Every incorrect fine repaid with interest. A written apology to each resident, and your resignation from the Oak Ridge Estates Board. Karen gasped. That's absurd. I served on that board for 11 years. Which makes your territorial overreach even more egregious. Douglas smiled thinly. The alternative is that we take this to court. I'm sure the local news would love a story about the HOA enforcer who didn't know where her own neighborhood ended. Karen imagined the headline, the whispers at the country club, the smirks from neighbors who had chafed under her rule. Her carefully cultivated reputation would crumble. I need time to consider my options, she said, standing abruptly. You have the same 14 days you gave Mrs. Thurman for her wheelchair ramp. Douglas closed the folder with finality. Oh, and Karen? That pool violation letter? Just a taste of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of bureaucratic harassment. Your pool is lovely, by the way. I jog past it every morning. As Karen left the clubhouse, her world had shifted. For years, she had wielded her clipboard and rule book like weapons. Now someone had turned those same weapons against her. By midnight, Karen's dining room resembled a war room. Property maps covered every surface, sticky notes created a rainbow of territorial markings, and 3 empty wine glasses stood testament to her deteriorating composure. It's worse than I thought, she muttered, tracing boundary lines with a shaking finger. 14 properties. I've been issuing violations to 14 properties outside our jurisdiction. Charles, bleary-eyed and patient as always, peered over her shoulder. Maybe you could just apologize, pay back the fines. Karen shot him a withering look. And admit defeat to Douglas Peterson? She spat the name like it tasted bad. No, there has to be another way. She pulled up the county records database she bullied a city clerk into giving her access to years ago. If Douglas thought he could out-Karen the original Karen, he was sorely mistaken. Hours of digging revealed a promising thread. Whispering Pines had missed filing some paperwork during their last boundary adjustment 5 years ago. Technically, the most recent official records showed the boundary was actually 50 feet closer to their development than currently marked, meaning 3 of the properties in question actually were under Oak Ridge jurisdiction. A technicality, Charles noted when she triumphantly showed him. The entire legal system is built on technicalities, Karen replied, her eyes gleaming with renewed purpose. And I only need a foothold. The next morning, Karen marched into the county records office wearing her power suit and carrying a leather portfolio filled with highlighted documents. The clerk visibly wilted at her approach. I need to speak with the property boundaries supervisor, Karen announced, bypassing any greeting. 20 minutes and several intimidated government employees later, Karen sat across from Marjorie Spencer, a stern woman in her 60s who seemed immune to Karen's usual tactics. Mrs. Willoughby, I'm afraid the paperwork issue you've identified was administratively corrected last year, Marjorie explained, pulling up records on her computer. The current boundaries are legally binding. But they weren't at the time I issued those violations, Karen insisted. Which would be relevant if you had authority to issue violations to anyone outside your HOA. Marjorie replied pointedly. The county doesn't recognize HOA jurisdiction beyond its registered boundaries, regardless of paperwork filing dates. Karen felt her leverage slipping. I'd like to appeal this decision. There's no decision to appeal. It's simply how property law works. Marjorie closed her folder. And frankly, Mrs. Willoughby, if you continue harassing residents outside your jurisdiction, the county could consider it a civil matter. As Karen left the county building, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Day 1 of 14. Tick-tock. DP. Karen's jaw clenched. Douglas Peterson was playing chess while she'd been playing checkers. But the game wasn't over yet. That evening, Karen drove slowly past the properties in question. She noticed something she'd overlooked in her righteous enforcement. These homes form a perfect buffer between Oak Ridge Estates and a commercial zone where developers have been trying to build a shopping center for years. If those properties weren't technically part of either HOA, a plan began forming in Karen's mind. She might have to concede this battle, but in doing so, she could potentially win a much bigger war. Charles, she called out upon returning home, get me the number for Maxwell Development Group. It's time to change tactics. Absolutely not, said Trevor Maxwell, CEO of Maxwell Development Group, his voice firm even through the speakerphone. We had enough dealings with Oak Ridge Estates to last a lifetime. Karen winced, remembering the 3 separate times she personally led the charge against Maxwell's proposed shopping center. Her Save Our Scenic Views campaign had been particularly effective, complete with doctored images showing how the development would supposedly cast shadows over Oak Ridge's prized community garden. The situation has changed, Karen insisted, pacing her living room. Those buffer properties aren't technically part of either HOA. With the right incentives, those homeowners could support rezoning. Trevor's laugh was short and bitter. And why would you help us now? You've been our biggest obstacle for years. Because, Karen said, lowering her voice despite being alone in her house, I need leverage against Whispering Pines. They're threatening my position. The silence on the line stretched until Karen wondered if the call had dropped. Let me get this straight, Trevor finally said. You want to help us build the shopping center you fought against for 5 years, just to spite another HOA president? Put that way, it sounded petty even to Karen. But she was committed now. I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial realignment, she replied primly. Your company gets its development, Oak Ridge gets certain concessions. What concessions? Exclusive resident discounts at all stores, a redesigned facade that complements our aesthetic guidelines, and a dedicated entrance that doesn't increase traffic through our streets. Trevor's interest was clearly piqued. And what does Karen Willoughby personally get out of this arrangement? Karen smiled tightly, the satisfaction of proper urban development. Try again. She sighed. Fine. I want Douglas Peterson to lose this battle he started. The shopping center would devastate Whispering Pines' property values far more than Oak Ridge's. They're closer and their homes are already valued lower. So it's revenge. I prefer to call it justice. Trevor chuckled. You know what? I respect the ruthlessness. Let's meet tomorrow in my office. Bring those property maps. After ending the call, Karen felt a twinge of something unfamiliar. Was it guilt? She gazed out her window at her immaculate neighborhood, the uniformed facades, the precisely trimmed hedges of the regulated mailboxes. She dedicated years to preserving this vision of suburban perfection. Now she was willing to compromise it all because someone had challenged her authority. The next morning, as Karen drove to Maxwell's office, she passed Mrs. Thurman's house, the elderly woman with the wheelchair ramp that apparently wasn't even in her jurisdiction. The ramp was gone, replaced by a portable metal one that was brought out only when needed. Karen had counted that as a victory at the time. Now, watching the elderly woman struggle with the unwieldy temporary solution, something uncomfortable twisted in Karen's stomach. Focus, she muttered to herself. This is about winning. But as she parked at Maxwell Development Group, she couldn't help wondering, what exactly was she fighting for anymore? The Maxwell Development Group's headquarters gleamed with modern architecture that would have violated at least 7 Oak Ridge Estates guidelines. Karen pursed her lips disapprovingly as she entered the sleek lobby, clutching her portfolio of maps and documents. Trevor Maxwell met her personally, a tall man with an easy smile that Karen had once described in a community newsletter as the grin of corporate greed. Today, she returned it with forced pleasantry. Mrs. Willoughby, he said, extending his hand. I never thought I'd see you cross this threshold voluntarily. Desperate times, she replied curtly, following him to a conference room where architectural renderings covered the walls, all depicting variations of the shopping center she fought against. I took the liberty of inviting someone else, Trevor said as they entered. A familiar figure rose from the conference table. Mrs. Thurman, Karen gasped. The elderly woman nodded coolly. Karen, surprised to see me in a discussion about my property? Karen's composure faltered. Your property is part of this conversation, yes, but... Mrs. Thurman represents the homeowners in the disputed area, Trevor explained. After your years of harassment, they formed their own neighborhood association, not an HOA. They've had enough of those, but a unified voting bloc. Eleanor Thurman's eyes were sharp with accumulated grievance. We know both HOAs have overstepped, and we know developers have been circling. So we decided to take control of our own fate. Karen slowly sank into a chair. She completely misjudged the situation. What exactly are you proposing? She asked cautiously. Trevor unveiled a new rendering. Unlike the massive shopping complex Karen had opposed, this showed a modest mixed-use development, small shops below, apartments above, green space integrated throughout. Community-focused development, Eleanor explained. Senior-friendly housing options, small businesses rather than chains, and a medical clinic. All things our neighborhood actually needs. And they've already agreed to this? Karen looked between them. Unanimously, Eleanor confirmed. Every homeowner in the disputed zone has signed a preliminary support agreement. Karen's mind raced. This wasn't her plan, but it could still serve a purpose against Douglas Peterson. And how does this affect Whispering Pines? Trevor and Eleanor exchanged looks. That's why we invited you, Trevor said. We need someone who understands HOA politics. Someone ruthless. Eleanor leaned forward. Douglas Peterson isn't fighting you over jurisdiction out of some noble desire for justice. Whispering Pines is nearly bankrupt. Their reserve fund was embezzled by the previous treasurer. Karen blinked. How do you know this? My daughter's an accountant. She found discrepancies when helping me fight your fines. Eleanor's voice was matter of fact. Peterson needs to expand his revenue base. He's been targeting those buffer properties to incorporate into Whispering Pines. With their higher property values, he could increase their HOA income significantly. The pieces clicked into place. Douglas wasn't enforcing boundaries. He was trying to move them. "So your development would block his expansion," Karen said slowly. "Yes," Trevor confirmed, "but we need someone to navigate the political aspects while we handle the commercial side." "Someone willing to get their hands dirty," Eleanor added pointedly. They were offering Karen a chance to defeat Douglas while reinventing herself as a community advocate rather than just an enforcer. It was clever, perhaps too clever. "What's my incentive?" Karen asked. Eleanor smiled thinly. "Besides keeping your reputation intact, a board position on the new development's community council. Legitimate authority, Karen." And Trevor added, "We named the Central Plaza after you." Karen Willoughby Plaza. It had a certain ring to it. "I'll need to review all the documents," Karen said, professional mask firmly in place despite her internal excitement. But as they discussed details, Karen couldn't shake a nagging question. Was she really changing course or just finding a new way to control others? The Whispering Pines monthly board meeting was typically a subdued affair, unlike the theatrical productions Karen orchestrated at Oak Ridge Estates. Tonight, however, the small clubhouse was packed. Karen sat in the back row, trying to remain inconspicuous despite the occasional glances and whispers. Word had spread that something significant was on the agenda. Douglas Peterson hadn't yet noticed her presence as he called the meeting to order. "Before we address regular business," Douglas announced, "I'd like to discuss an exciting opportunity for our community. As many of you know, we've been working to clarify our northern boundary." Karen watched him unveil a map showing Whispering Pines' proposed expansion, a plan that would incorporate the disputed properties into their jurisdiction. "The homeowners in this area have been operating without proper HOA oversight," Douglas continued smoothly. "By bringing them under our umbrella, we can ensure community standards while expanding our amenities through increased revenue." A community standards sales pitch. Karen almost admired the technique. It was one she used herself countless times. Douglas continued outlining benefits until a hand raised from the middle row. "Yes, Mrs. Thurman," he acknowledged, his smile faltering slightly. Eleanor Thurman stood, leaning on her cane. "I'm curious why you're presenting this as if it's already decided. Our homeowners haven't agreed to join Whispering Pines." Douglas's smile tightened. "We got preliminary discussions with several residents who expressed interest." 2 out of 14 isn't several," Eleanor countered. "And those 2 reconsidered after learning about your reserve fund situation." A murmur rippled through the audience. Douglas straightened his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "Our finances are not the topic tonight," he said firmly. "They should be," called another voice. Karen recognized Mr. Abernathy, whose holiday lights she'd once deemed excessively festive, despite his property not being under her jurisdiction. "Especially if you're asking to expand while you can't maintain what you already have." Douglas's composure was cracking. "These are complex matters, which is why," Eleanor interrupted, "we've developed an alternative proposal." She nodded to the back of the room and Karen took her cue. Standing tall, she walked to the front with the Maxwell development renderings, feeling Douglas's shocked gaze. "Mrs. Willoughby has been instrumental in helping us craft a solution that benefits everyone," Eleanor announced as Karen unveiled the plans for the mixed-use development. Douglas found his voice. You fought every development proposal for years." Karen smiled pleasantly. "I've opposed inappropriate development. This project addresses actual community needs while respecting existing neighborhoods." She turned to the audience. "As someone who admittedly overstepped boundaries in the past, I learned the importance of listening to what residents actually want, not just enforcing what I think is best." The words felt strange in her mouth, partly because they were Trevor Maxwell's script, partly because she was surprised to find she partially meant them. For the next 20 minutes, Karen and Eleanor presented their vision. The small businesses, the senior housing, the medical facilities, the green spaces. The room's energy shifted from skepticism to interest as residents asked questions about improving their struggling community. Douglas finally interrupted, his voice tight. "This is a clear conflict of interest. Mrs. Willoughby is only supporting this to undermine our HOA." Karen met his gaze. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, I'm supporting this because it's what these homeowners want. Something I've learned rather belatedly is that HOAs should serve communities, not rule them." Douglas's face flushed. This is rich coming from the woman who measured grass with a ruler. "Yes," Karen acknowledged, surprising everyone, including herself. "I did that. I've been rigid and controlling. But people can change when shown their mistakes." She turned to Eleanor. "Some more gracefully than others." The meeting erupted into discussions, with Douglas struggling to regain control. As Karen returned to her seat, she caught Charles watching from the doorway, an expression of surprised pride on his face. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting for something she actually believed might be right. 3 days after the contentious meeting, Karen sat at her kitchen table surrounded by binders of Oak Ridge Estates regulations she personally expanded over the years. Each color-coded tab represented a different category of restrictions: landscaping, green; exterior modifications, blue; holiday decorations, red; naturally, and dozens more. Charles watched her from the doorway. Spring cleaning? Karen shook her head. Research. I've been enforcing these rules for so long I never stopped to question whether they all make sense. She held up a page. Did you know we have a 12-page section on acceptable mailbox designs? 12 pages, Charles. He approached cautiously, unused to this reflective version of his wife. You wrote most of that section. I know, Karen sighed. That's what bothers me. Her phone buzzed. A text from Trevor Maxwell. County zoning board meeting moved up. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Be prepared. Karen felt a flutter of anxiety. Everything was moving faster than anticipated. The disputed homeowners had unanimously petitioned for rezoning to accommodate the mixed-use development, but Whispering Pines, led by an increasingly desperate Douglas, was fighting back with technical objections. I need to visit someone, Karen announced, standing abruptly. 30 minutes later, she stood on Eleanor Thurman's porch, awkwardly clutching a folder. The elderly woman opened the door with surprise. Karen, the meeting isn't until tomorrow. This isn't about the meeting, Karen replied, fidgeting with her typically immaculate hair. May I come in? Eleanor's home was cozy and lived in, with family photos covering the walls and a half-completed puzzle on the dining table, all violations of Oak Ridge aesthetic guidelines. Karen found it unexpectedly charming. I owe you an apology, Karen said without preamble once they were seated. A real one, not the forced one Douglas wanted me to write. Eleanor watched her carefully, saying nothing. The wheelchair ramp, Karen continued. It was wrong of me to demand its removal. Even if your property had been in my jurisdiction, which it wasn't, medical necessities should take precedence over aesthetic concerns. She opened her folder and removed a document. This is a check reimbursing all fines you paid with interest. And this, she produced another paper, is a revised guideline for Oak Ridge estates regarding accommodations for residents with disabilities. Eleanor took the papers with raised eyebrows. You're actually changing the rules. I'm trying to change my approach, Karen admitted. I've spent years thinking I was maintaining community standards when really I was just imposing my vision on everyone else. Eleanor studied her. That's surprisingly self-aware, Karen. Don't get me wrong, Karen said quickly. I still believe in order and standards, but perhaps with more flexibility and purpose. Eleanor smiled slightly. Is this transformation just to beat Douglas Peterson? Karen considered the question honestly. It started that way, she acknowledged, but something shifted. When I saw residents at that meeting actually excited about a project that would genuinely improve their lives, it felt different from the satisfaction of citing violations. She hesitated. The truth is, I've been so focused on protecting property values that I forgot about the people those properties belong to. Eleanor nodded slowly. That's a start, Karen. But real change takes time and consistency. I know, Karen replied. That's why, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I'm resigning from the Oak Ridge board next week. Eleanor's eyes widened. Really? Yes. 11 years is enough. Karen straightened her shoulders. But first, we have a zoning board to convince. As Karen left Eleanor's home, she noticed the temporary metal ramp leaning against the porch, the awkward, unsafe solution that had replaced the permanent one Karen had forced her to remove. That evening, Karen made a call to a contractor she knew. By morning before the zoning meeting, a crew was already installing a new permanent ramp at Eleanor's house, tasteful, safe, and paid for entirely by Karen Willoughby. It wasn't enough to erase years of overreaching enforcement, but it was a concrete step toward becoming someone different, someone better than the neighborhood tyrant she'd allowed herself to become. The county zoning board meeting room buzzed with tension. On one side sat Karen, Eleanor, and the disputed area residents. On the other, Douglas Peterson with the Whispering Pines board. Trevor Maxwell and his development team occupied the middle ground quite literally. Karen had spent the morning coaching Eleanor and the other homeowners on presentation tactics she perfected during years of community battles. The irony wasn't lost on her, using skills honed through enforcement to now fight for freedom from excessive rules. County Commissioner Jenkins called the meeting to order. We're here to consider rezoning application number 47B, proposing mixed-use development on parcels currently zoned residential between Oak Ridge Estates and Whispering Pines subdivisions. Douglas was first to speak, armed with financial projections and property value concerns. His presentation was polished but increasingly desperate as he emphasized community cohesion and consistent standards, phrases Karen recognized from her own arsenal. When it was the homeowner's turn, Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady. We're not choosing between HOAs. We're choosing self-determination. Our properties have become pawns in a power struggle while our actual needs go ignored. One by one, residents detailed their experiences, The elderly needing housing options to downsize without leaving their neighborhood, families wanting walkable amenities, a former nurse explaining how the proposed medical clinic would serve an area lacking healthcare access. Trevor Maxwell kept his presentation technically focused, avoiding the usual developer grandstanding. The proposal had been refined based on community input, exactly what HOAs were theoretically supposed to facilitate but rarely did. Finally, it was Karen's turn. She approached the podium feeling Douglas's glare. For once, she didn't have color-coded binders or property photos marked with violations. Instead, she had a single page of notes. "My name is Karen Willoughby," she began. "For 11 years, I've served on the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board, most recently as Vice President of Community Standards." She paused, looking at the faces watching her, some hopeful, some suspicious, all waiting to see which version of Karen would speak today. "I've enforced rules down to the inch, measured grass height with rulers, and cited violations for everything from unauthorized bird baths to insufficiently muted exterior paint colors." A few knowing chuckles rippled through the room. "I believe I was protecting a vision of perfect suburban living." Karen glanced at Eleanor, who gave an encouraging nod. "But perfection, I've learned, doesn't necessarily create community. These homeowners have shown me that thriving neighborhoods need flexibility to meet diverse needs, something HOAs, including mine, often forget." She turned to face Douglas directly. "This isn't about HOA against HOA. It's about recognizing when our systems need to evolve. I'm publicly announcing my resignation from the Oak Ridge Estates board, effective immediately, because I believe I can better serve my community by helping build bridges rather than enforcing boundaries." A murmur of surprise swept through the room. Charles, sitting in the back row, looked simultaneously shocked and proud. "I support this rezoning not to defeat another HOA president," Karen continued, "but because these residents deserve the right to shape their own community future. The proposed development meets actual needs rather than just maintaining artificial standards." She concluded simply, "Sometimes the best way to preserve what matters in a community is to allow it to grow." The commissioners deliberated while the room buzzed with conversation. Karen found herself surrounded by Oak Ridge residents who'd come to witness the proceedings, many expressing surprise at her new position, others quietly admitting they'd chafed under the strict regulations for years. When Commissioner Jenkins called for the vote, the rezoning passed 4-1. As the meeting adjourned, Douglas approached Karen, his expression unreadable. "Impressive pivot," he said quietly. "You managed to lose the battle, but somehow claimed victory." Karen shook her head. "That's the thing, Douglas. I'm not keeping score anymore." He studied her. "So what's next for the infamous Karen Willoughby without an HOA to terrorize?" Karen smiled. "Trevor's offered me a position consulting on community integration for development projects. Turns out my knowledge of regulations and neighborhood dynamics is valuable when used constructively." "And the Karen Willoughby Plaza?" he asked skeptically. "Renamed to Community Commons," she replied. "Some things should belong to everyone." As Douglas walked away, Charles approached and slipped his arm around her waist. "Are you really resigning?" "Yes," Karen confirmed, "though I've agreed to help train my replacement with a much lighter touch." "And the pool?" he asked with a smile. "The one that started all this?" Karen laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that felt unfamiliar but right. "I'm thinking of hosting an open swim once a month. No rulers, no clipboard, just neighbors actually being neighborly." As they walked to their car, Karen noticed Eleanor supervising the installation of her new wheelchair ramp. The contractor was adding a flower box, technically a modification Karen would have cited months ago.